Hello and welcome to another session of Informally Formal. I'm truly excited because once again we have one of my favorite person to talk to, Dr. Zaidi Sattar. He's been on our program before, so I'll just briefly introduce him. Dr. Zaidi Sattar is the chairman of PRI in Bangladesh. He got his PhD from Boston University, taught for many years in the United States, and worked for the World Bank as an advisor, as a senior economist, and has held so very many positions. But the most notable one, as I had mentioned earlier in my first talk with Dr. Zaidi Sattar, that he was instrumental in formulating the 6th and the 7th five-year plan of Bangladesh. A very renowned
and also
yes,
two perspective plans.
Yes.
Two perspective plans.
Perspective plans.
2010 to 2021, and then 2021 to 41.
Oh, absolutely.
These are all out there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And also, if our viewers remember, Dr. Zaidi Sattar is also a civil servant turned trade economist. So welcome, Dr. Zaidi Sattar. It's such a pleasure to have you back in our show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, very good. So our today's topic is exchange rate. Let me just dive into my first question, Dr. Sattar, and which would be explain for our viewers, exchange rate. What is it all about? Over to you.
Very good question. It's a very, very broad one too. Now, actually, exchange rate is a very critical policy variable in the economy. People don't seem to realize it. It's always in the background. But actually, the exchange rate, which is, simply speaking, it's the price of foreign exchange. We can call it the price of foreign exchange. For instance, when we talk of the exchange rate of Taka and the dollar, what it is really is the price of $1. Like all other prices of all other products, the price of foreign exchange also is determined by demand and supply of foreign exchange. Like all other products, the exchange rate is also the price of foreign exchange. In this case, it can be a US dollar, it can be a pound sterling, it can be a euro. Now, most international transactions, payments for international trade, are done in US dollar. Now, about 70% of international transaction is done in the US dollar. It's a bit lower than the 80% plus that used to be transacted in US dollar before the global financial crisis of 2008. Now we have, other pound sterling, euro, and even the Chinese renminbi has entered into these international transactions. But the dollar predominates by and large. Now, how is the exchange rate relevant for the Bangladesh economy? Having a stable exchange rate is very critical. It reflects that what is the current state of the economy, the domestic side of the economy, as well as the external side of the economy. If there are imbalances on the external side, or even in the domestic economy, that will be reflected in the exchange rate. The exchange rate could be unstable, it can go up and down if an economy has, let's say, very serious problems on the external side. For instance, balance of trade is going into deficits, or there is a debt situation which is getting out of hand, not sustainable, then that will be reflected on the exchange rate. Likewise, in the domestic economy, if you have fiscal deficits that are unsustainable, the government is spending much more than it is mobilizing in terms of revenue, and domestic demand is outstripping supply of goods and services, it eventually reflects on the exchange rate as well. It affects domestic prices, of course, but the exchange rate is not going to be what it is. But thankfully, I think the government of Bangladesh, particularly Bangladesh Bank, which is responsible for managing the exchange rate, has done a pretty decent job of maintaining a fairly stable exchange rate for the past few years.
Okay.
So that's so that creates and the the idea that the exchange rate is stable also tells us something about the state of the economy, which means that the macroeconomic fundamentals in the economy are in good shape. If you have imbalances, either external or internal, then the exchange rate can be stable. It's going to be a bit messy.
Yeah.
So we have some good. All the talk about Bangladesh economy having maintained a good macroeconomic balance for the last 25 years plus. Prudent macroeconomic management, I think one can say. But in certain years, things get a bit messy, like, result of COVID-19, which has led to, fiscal deficits, even trade deficits, not what we would like to see. Export performance, import performance is not great, but we hope that things are going to improve.
Dr. Sattar, that was great, what you explained about exchange rate. So help us understand a little bit more on why is it important for the economy and society in general?
You see, as I said, since the exchange rate is the price of foreign exchange, it's a price, first of all. Changes in that price affects prices in the domestic economy. It affects the price of export, it affects the price of import, and thereby it also affects the prices of all what we call tradable goods. Most goods are tradable, and they can be exported or imported, yes? And even services today are tradable, For instance, the migrant remittances that we receive, these are basically these are earnings from export of factor services,
Right.
labor as a factor. So, basically, the exchange rate has an impact on domestic prices. If the exchange rate depreciates, that means if you need more Taka to buy a US dollar, that means to say that domestic prices of imports and then import substitutes and then all other tradable and non-tradable goods that are related,
it's all
prices of those things. Yeah.
So absolutely. So Dr. Sattar, what in your opinion would then be, what should we do to have a stable exchange rate?
Good question. Now, a stable exchange rate should not mean that it is fixed. Let's say the current exchange rate is $1, 85 Taka to a dollar. A stable exchange rate doesn't mean it will remain 85 Taka to a dollar ad infinitum. Now, let me give you a slight historical background about exchange rate regimes. Back before 1970s in particular, most exchange rates were fixed. We were in fixed exchange rate regime. So at any given time you had, even Bangladesh, after it became independent, had a fixed exchange rate. I think that rate was 7.6 Taka to a dollar. That fixed exchange rate would have to be adjusted periodically. In 1992, we adopted what was called a flexible exchange rate system. A flexible exchange rate meaning that you don't have to, it's not a fixed exchange rate, but you don't have to wait for 1 year and 2 years for the exchange rate to be adjusted. The exchange rate could change, on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, or so on and so forth, depending on the demand and supply. Now, how does the demand and supply of foreign exchange come about? When the economy has to buy a lot of imports, you need foreign exchange to pay for the imports, right? Sure. That creates the demand. That creates a demand for foreign exchange. When we export goods or services, we generate the supply of foreign exchange. So that's how the demand and supply of foreign exchange happens.
Right. Dr. Sattar, let me interject here. The main interest of our audience, I'll tell you, there are two camps. One is, of course, the exporters. The exporters have been crying for the longest time to devalue Taka. Okay? And of course, we know that Bangladesh still imports more than it exports. So there will be pressure on that side. So I would like you to go straight into that argument and help us understand what should Bangladesh do?
Okay, good. Another good question. Now, let me tell you, exchange rate regimes are also relevant. In 2005, Bangladesh went into what is called the floating exchange rate regime. It means to say, on a day-to-day, month, minute by minute, the exchange rate could fluctuate. That's a floating exchange rate. However, most countries who are now subscribing to floating exchange rate system don't let the exchange rate fluctuate, beyond any certain band, because too much fluctuation is bad. So they follow what is called a managed floating exchange rate system. Bangladesh also follows the managed float system. Bangladesh Bank is the agency that manages our exchange rate, making sure that it doesn't fluctuate too widely. But what happens is, what we see in the last year, 2 years, the exchange rate has been depreciating only by less than 1%, by about half a percentage point or so. And that is where, your question, why my exporters have been crying for some depreciation. Now, if the exchange rate stays at, let's say, 85 taka to a dollar, what the exporter is getting for exporting, let's say, $100 worth of goods, is getting 8,500 taka for his exports. If it remains 8,500, if the exchange rate remains fixed at 85, which has been the case. Look, it hasn't been, it has been there between 84 and 85 for the last 2 years. So the exporter, on the other hand, is expecting to, they are facing price pressure. There's a lot of talk about how the ready-made garment sector is saying, oh, we are, the buyers are, giving us no price. They are in fact reducing prices. So if they are reducing prices and they're facing price pressure, and all they are getting for every dollar of exports is 85 taka, each year we have inflation of 5.5%. So the value of the taka is also falling by about 5.5% to anybody in Bangladesh. So this is a double whammy. The buyers are putting price pressure, and the taka is losing value, 5.5% each year. So they would like to see a bit more taka per dollar of their exports. Sure. So exporters, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, especially also the fact that, Dr. Sattar, if we look at countries that we compete with, if we look at neighboring India, has depreciated the rupee quite a bit.
Yes.
If you look at Vietnam, they've depreciated quite a bit. So obviously there is that competitive pressure as well. Apart from the fact that our exporters are losing their taka value, so to speak, because of inflation and because of what they get in terms of selling their goods abroad.
Absolutely. But even if we look at, in Bangladesh terms, our exporters are, whether or not India and Vietnam have depreciated their currency, Bangladesh exporters are not getting what they would like to see for every dollar that they export. Okay, so regardless of what when the competitors are also depreciating, which means they are getting a bit extra from their exports, and therefore, they are better off compared to our exporters.
Right.
So that is why a comparison makes sense. But even regardless, Bangladesh, we can see that they are not, being benefited by the this fixed level in the nominal exchange rate, or the nominal exchange rate ought to depreciate uh, if not by the full amount of the inflation rate, by certain amount, because imagine Bangladesh inflation rates are around 5.5% each year, compared to the inflation rate in the United States or Europe, where most of our exports go. There, the inflation rate is under 1%. So, relative to these two destination markets, our currency is losing value much more. Okay. Now, here is the argument against, depreciating anytime. The argument against is, as you said, we are importing much more than what we are exporting. In the fiscal year 2019, we exported $40 billion worth, but we imported about $59 billion. So there's huge. So what, if they want to depreciation, it's good for the exporter, but depreciation also increases the price of imports.
Correct.
So whoever is using, let's say, imported inputs, and the consumer who buys consumer goods that are imported or domestically produced import substitutes, those prices will go up. Okay. So that is the crux of the problem. So how do you then help exporters through the exchange rate without causing that price problem that would be coming from the price effect on imports?
Thank you for making the time, and I would like to thank our audience for joining us for this absolutely exciting topic that everyone is talking about, especially our exporters. So I would, with an invitation for our audience to join us again for our next episode, I'd leave it there, sign off by wishing everyone to stay safe. And with that, bye-bye.